My name is Mary Karen McKee, and I lead IIE's Corporate and Foundation Programs team and Student Emergency Initiatives programming. And the Greek Diaspora Fellowship Program falls within my portfolio. So I work closely with Jeremy Coates, who's the program lead for this program, who many of you know, and Dylan Gibson, who many of you know, Kylie Nivens, who's also here with us. And so we are really looking forward to sharing the results that our research evaluation and learning team have put together on the impact of the Greek Diaspora Fellowship Program over the years. This is an initiative that was launched in 2016. We'll hear more of the details. We've supported, though, more than 200 projects at 25 Greek institutions, and believe firmly in sort of the desire of the diaspora and those diaspora connections in advancing learning and collaboration across borders. So I have a number of thank yous. Obviously, this program would not be possible without the support of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. And in particular, I want to thank Eleni Agoridi, who has been our partner in this process throughout. I also want to thank the Fulbright Foundation of Greece and Artemis Sinetu. Fulbright Foundation has also been our partner on this program from the beginning. Our advisory council, very engaged in the program, in the selection process, in advising us on the trajectory of the program. Our hosts and fellows, both past and present. You know, this program and the diaspora and the potential of the diaspora to impact their home countries has really also inspired other programming, other diaspora programming. This past year, we launched a diaspora program with the Albanian American Diaspora Development Group. And so we've been very excited to see that and share those lessons learned with our colleagues in Albania. And so with that, I just want to thank you all for being here, welcome you all, and turn the mic over to Eleni Agoridi from SNF, who will share a few words with us, and then we'll hear from our research evaluation and learning team, who is in-house at IIE, Zhenya and Shelby, and have really been also great partners to us in this project. Eleni, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
I can start my video for some reason. It says the host has stopped it, so that's fine. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm here today with my colleague Chris Davey from our New York office, who is part of our communications team. I haven't prepared anything. I mean, we're very happy that we've been supporting the program with the approval of 2 grants, and now the second one is coming to an end. We really look forward to listening to the findings, and thank you. I also want to thank everyone, Jeremy, Mary, Artemis from the Fulbright Foundation, whose role has been very critical in the development of the program, and of course everyone from the advisory committee and all the participants, fellows and hosts. Thank you very much.
All right, well, I guess this is our part. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon if you're in a different time zone. My name is Evgenia Valui, and I manage the IIE's evaluation portfolio, which includes the evaluation of the GDFP. I am joined today by my colleague, Shelby Anderson-Holt, and we're thrilled to present to you the findings of the impact evaluation of the GDFP. Since Mary and Eleni have already touched on the history of GDFP, its purpose, we'll skip that part. On this slide, next slide, Shelby, please. You can see some of the key findings related to the 3 areas of our evaluation. And we will pause here for just a second to give you a chance to read them, but this is high-level recap, and Shelby will be going into a lot more detail on each of these. But before we proceed, I would like to touch on our evaluation approach and methodology. IIE's Research Evaluation and Learning Unit is a separate department at IIE, which helps us be much more objective about the evaluations that we are doing. And we have been working on monitoring and evaluation of the GDFP since its start. We have our evaluation had several goals. We were looking at evaluating the achievement of the program, assessing its outcomes, and assessing the implementation. And we specifically looked at how the program has supported achieving the institutional linkages, the professional networks, and strengthening the capacity for Greek institutions. So a little bit more about how we did all of this. So we were conducting formative and summative evaluations throughout the life of the program. So as Eleni mentioned, there were 2 grants. So throughout the life of the program, we were doing formative evaluation, looking at how the program is progressing towards its goals. And twice during the life of the program, we conducted summative evaluation, looking at, okay, so what have been the outcomes? So the first time we did it was in 2017 at the end of the first grant, and the second time was this summer and this fall. We took a mixed methods approach to conducting the evaluation, which means that we were collecting quantitative and qualitative data. We find that it's critically important to have a holistic understanding of all that is happening, of the potential outcomes, and it gives us a better perspective, a more nuanced one. For the quantitative aspect, we conducted a number of surveys before the program, collecting the data from fellows and hosts right after their travel to Greece. The fellows traveled to Greece. We also collected surveys from fellows and from their host partners, and we collected alumni surveys as well. And we were extremely lucky to have 2 opportunities to conduct qualitative fieldwork in Greece in 2017. And this past May, when Shelby traveled to Greece to interview the fellows, the hosts, the faculty, the students at universities, and of course, the advisory council members and the program staff. So with all that, I am very happy to pass the torch to Shelby to share the findings of our evaluation. Shelby, sorry, you have to unmute.
Thank you so much, Anya, and thank you everyone for making the time to be here. It's a very busy time of year. And I'm just really excited to share what we've come up with through the impact evaluation. So to just kind of summarize a little bit of what's happened, there have been 119 fellowships funded through the pilot and the renewal phase of the program. Fellows have been hosted at 25 different Greek institutions, and many institutions have hosted more than 1 fellow over the course of the program. The fellowships have been hosted at institutions across Greece, at about 2/3 of the Greek regions. And you can kind of see here, Central Greece and Attica are have been where most of the institutions and most of the fellows have been hosted. But actually the most fellows were hosted by an institution in Thessaloniki. So it's been a really good diversity of institutions that have benefited from the program. The program has had really strong diversity of host and fellow participants. The pilot program was open to United States and Canadian diaspora fellows. And then in the renewal program, it was open to diaspora living in Australia and the UK as well. There were fellows who participated in both the pilot and renewal phases of the program, and those fellows had especially strong outcomes with the program. There were 18 of those fellowships, and as we go through the report and the presentation today, those are alumni fellowships. The program also worked really hard to have as many women hosts and fellows in the program as possible. And this was another really big benefit that we'll kind of see from participant data. Another kind of unique feature of this fellowship is that it was open to academic disciplines from anywhere in the university. So most fellowships were in projects in STEM fields, but there were also a lot of projects in humanities departments, business schools. And so this diversity of academic disciplines is kind of another big piece that played a role in the outcomes for the program that we'll talk about today. So the design and implementation of the program was something that came up a lot as a strong value of the fellowship. This fellow kind of highlighted that fellowship was very well thought out. It gave me enough funds to have a certain flexibility so that I could move through the community of the university easily and confidently. There was never any tension about money or supplies. I was able to create projects with ease and without awkwardness. This is priceless. This kind of sentiment came up a lot. We saw that about 98% of hosts and fellows said they were able to complete their project activities, kind of in spite of all the exciting things that have been happening as the program has been implemented. Individual projects, there were over 126 different types of projects, and the fellowships, there were 119 fellowships. In terms of outputs for the program, things that we can kind of count, big numbers, there were a lot of research products, and you can kind of see them in more depth in the report. But just for example, there were 50 different published academic articles and 10 published books and book chapters. This is only the published ones. There are a lot in the works, and that is because a lot of hosts and fellows continue to work together in the months and years after their fellowships ended. And so as we were surveying and interviewing participants who have been finished with their actual fellowship visit for quite a while, they are still working together to finish research publications, develop, conference proposals into or conference papers into book chapters, and kind of continue the work of their fellowship projects. There were 42 different curricula development and exchange opportunity projects. We added, the REL team added this interest in the exchange opportunities because we saw in the monitoring data that a lot of fellows who were developing curricula were also incorporating exchange opportunities into that. There have been 10 new or continued curricula projects or exchange collaborations that outlasted the fellowships themselves. And we saw that there was a lot of the curriculum development was a really positive outcome for institutions. There were quite a number of mentorships, and a lot of the fellowships incorporated some kind of teaching or training element. One fellow or one student mentee was kind of talking about how the mentor, the fellow being Greek, was a big asset. They made them more relatable. And we've seen that these mentorships have again continued and sustained, these relationships are sustained after the fellows have left Greece. A lot of fellows served on students' dissertation panels or have continued to advise students as they've gone to graduate programs or moved into postgraduate programs, to help them find jobs. So there's been a lot of really exciting things seen with mentorships. The curriculum development, so this chart is talking about increase and improvements in attitudes that institutions had toward curriculum development, research, and exchange. And then looking at increases in allocations. So looking for changes in funding and faculty time that's allocated for these types of projects. Curriculum development had the biggest jump in department's attitude towards it. What we saw in the data was that hosts and fellows were able to kind of sell their departments on the idea of making innovative improvements to curricula, to updating things, to kind of putting in that extra work to connect with resources outside of the institution and really reinvigorate the teaching methodologies and the practices that departments were employing. Research saw the biggest jump in funding allocations by departments. And so that was a really important factor for whether fellowships continued to, like whether hosts and fellows continued to work together after the fellowships ended. And we also saw a lot of improvement in people's opinion of, attitude towards, and processes for developing exchanges. The second thing that we kind of wanted to show you about the institutions and the projects was that there was a lot of improvement for there's a lot of increased number and quality of collaborations, course offerings, exchange opportunities, and mentorship opportunities. So actually, all projects that had a research element said that this was that they had more research collaborations following the project. And then we also saw that there were a lot more course offerings and that those were continuing to be offered after fellows left. So circling back to that idea of mentorship opportunities having kind of a big impact on students, institutions were reporting that the student engagement in their curricula and in their research opportunities increased as a result of the fellow being at the institution, and they continue to see students engaging with those activities after the fellow left. This included people moving to the department or developing a research topic that incorporated work that the fellow had done. So there were a lot of ways that the fellow left this legacy at the institution with the students. Another really important finding was that that hosts were able to apply for and win a lot of new funding. There was at least 1.7 million euros in new funding awarded to Greek institutions for GDFP related work and proposals. We're pretty confident it's actually more than that, but this is what we can confirm. There were a lot of different types of funding that hosts and fellows were applying for. The Erasmus Plus program was a way that hosts and fellows brought in student engagement. And for example, there was one institution where they used an Erasmus Plus grant to have the student do kind of a reciprocal exchange to the fellows home institution in the US. And so there's just a lot of big changes that happened in departments around access to funding, opportunities, getting invited to submit proposals, and that resulting in, euros. I won't say dollars, they're mostly euros. The opportunity to work with Greek institutions and students seems to have elevated fellows' opinions of Greek academic capacity. And it really drove interest from fellows and their home institutions in further collaboration with the host institution and their faculty. 93% of hosts and fellows said that they were able to engage in developing institutional linkages. And I think this quote really says a lot. This fellow talked about leaving Greece, hadn't been in contact with anyone professionally in Greece for 16 years. But because of their work with the faculty and students at this institution during the GDFP, they're looking for these ways to connect in the future. 83% of hosts also believed that the program elevated their reputation in the international academic community. This is a really exciting outcome to see. We were interested in understanding if the fellowships would kind of have this prestige, or the projects would allow hosts to highlight their institutional capacity, and that does seem to have been the case. This host specifically talked about a conference that made a really big difference in how the international community understood this institution's capacity. And there have been a lot of new opportunities coming from that project and projects like it. So all of that interest and work towards developing institutional linkages did actually have some results. We saw 16 newly formed pairs of linked institutions. This chart differentiates whether an institution, whether a fellow's home institution and the host institution were formally or informally linked before the Greek Diaspora Program. We wanted to separate those out and see just the new linkages that formed because of the program. And so we saw several develop during the Greek Diaspora Fellowship, but then there's been even more that have been formalized or developed in an informal way since the fellowship ended. Fellows talked about developing MOUs, memorandum of understanding, developing joint, what am I trying to say? Joint curricula, joint programming, joint coursework. Some of them are jointly funding PhD students or new faculty positions that are teaching at both institutions. So there's a really wide variety of ways that these linkages resulted in on the ground benefits for Greek institutions. There was also this really exciting change in institutions' interest in pursuing other linkages just in general. So we saw that more than 4 out of 5 were interested in pursuing some kind of institutional linkage, formal or informal, with the fellow's home institution. But then more than 2 out of 3 were also just looking for other ways to engage with US institutions, institutions elsewhere in the international community. And then there's also interest in developing linkages across, like within the network of the Greek academic community. One of the main goals of the program was to expand professional networks. we saw that 98% of participants were able to participate in networking activities as they had expected to. And this is kind of in spite of the COVID-19 context. There was an average of over 100 new connections per fellowship. And what we saw is that those connections tended to endure, especially the host fellow connections. It was basically 100% of hosts and fellows who were still in close contact, however long after the fellowship ended, that we were asking them about it. So the number of new connections, as you can imagine, if you've met Greek people and how social they are, I think no one will be shocked that there were a lot of new connections. And I really want to highlight that those connections were like deep and meaningful, and people's understanding of what counted as a connection was quite a high standard. So people were talking about working with people long term, lots of different projects, and have I like forwarding people job opportunities, like students' job opportunities, helping people edit their papers. The connections that people were talking about were active and mutually beneficial. And we saw this through the ongoing collaborations that continued in a lot of different types of project areas after the fellowships. So the overarching strengths of the projects, there were as many kind of different outcomes of projects as there were fellowships, because they were so diverse and individualized to the needs and the context and the strengths of the hosts and fellows and the host institution departments. There were just kind of as many outcomes as there were projects. But in a general sense, we did kind of see a trend where certain types of projects had different types of benefits, depending on some different factors. The teaching and mentoring fellowships were really where we saw that deep and lasting impact on students. When we were talking to students about their experience working with the fellow, students were coming to tell us about fellows that they hadn't seen for years, because this fellow had kind of changed their trajectory by advising them, writing them recommendation letters, just really changing their professional path. And so teaching and mentoring had this quite lasting impact. And this is especially true in humanities and arts departments that were saying that it was sometimes difficult to get guest lecturers to come to their institution, because guest lecturing was usually associated with some type of research funding. And so that opportunity to have someone guest lecturing and not have it be attached to a research project was really valuable. Curriculum development definitely came up among administrators and people who were looking for that sustained and deep impact on the institution itself. Updating coursework, developing new curricula was something that deeply impacted many students for a very long time, because departments were implementing these courses. Many of them were implemented as standard or new prerequisite courses for their programs. And then research projects had such a diverse array of benefits. They had the strongest outcomes for continuing active collaborations. From the data, it looks like that's because they were the easiest to continue to fund, and that funding really drove that continued work together. But they also served as the cornerstone for mentorship, especially in departments in STEM disciplines. Fellows were able to work really closely with students in the lab when they had the opportunity to have students working with them on a research project. So with so many years of learning, we wanted to kind of boil it down to a couple of takeaways. I did hear this a lot when I was in Greece. Everyone thinks there should be something like this, some way of kind of intentionally engaging with this really illustrious Greek diaspora academic community, and finding ways to continue the benefits of this program model. So the first finding that we kind of wanted to capture with the report is that the diversity of projects was kind of cornerstone to a lot of the outcomes. And diversity meaning the personal attributes of the participants, the type of projects, the disciplines, the academic disciplines, and then also thinking about the size and geographic location of the Greek host institution. These factors there's kind of so many different things to consider with the proposals, and you can really only look at that, look for those elements of diversity if there's a really strong recruitment process, which is something that this program really benefited from. And then there was also this kind of finding that having the selection committee on the same page about the priorities of the program, what the benefits of different types of projects were, was really beneficial to selecting candidates, selecting fellowships that had these good outcomes and were set up for success. Kind of hand in glove with the idea of diversity and having a variety of different types of projects. The program also really leveraged a lot of flexibility and allowed a lot of flexibility for participants. So not only were hosts and fellows able to design their own kind of targets and milestones, they, based on their individual project and and kind of their individual needs and strengths, they were also, especially because of the COVID context, able to adjust those projects to fit the dynamic environment and the way things were changing. So many of them, created virtual components of their projects, or just completely transitioned what they were doing to focus on, teaching instead of curriculum development or some other kind of transition like that. The 18 alumni fellowships were also a really important element of this flexibility, allowing fellows to return to the host institution seemed to really compound the benefits of the fellowships. You can kind of see more about that in the report, but the variety of ways that the program allowed people to engage kind of, I think, was this big piece of why it worked so well. I think a third innovative thing that we kind of wanted to highlight about the GDFP was that this model brings this intentionality to the partnership between diaspora fellows and Greek host institutions. When the program was facilitating pairs, partnerships, it was very conscientious of the needs and strategic goals of both institutions, and having that long-term vision in mind of wanting to see the partnerships develop into formalized, long-standing, sustained collaborations helped I think, drive those outcomes, because the focus then is on the relationship as well as the individual project that was being funded. And then just kind of leave us with the future before us. The program really, as we kind of mentioned, benefited from a strong existing network and built on that network and strengthened it further. As Mary mentioned earlier, the work of the Fulbright Foundation in Greece and the Advisory Council was really critical to connecting with the existing academic network of Greek academics and the diaspora. And since, in kind of the wake of the GDFP, there are a lot of new exciting initiatives happening, a lot of new opportunities and interest for connection between the Greek higher education institutions and diaspora academic community. So we're really hoping that this program and the report about it will help document that strength and provide a good foundation for future programs to continue to build on what's been done already. I think with that, we're going to find out if we can take questions.
Thank you so much, Shelby. I loved it. I hope all of you loved it because I know that for you, this was the first time hearing this. And we will be taking questions now. We have 2 questions that have already come in through the Q&A. I think that's probably the best way to type them. And I don't know if we have an option to also raise hand and unmute to ask a question, but let's probably start with those. So the first question is about the reasons for the gender distribution. And Jeremy, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shelby, for your presentation, and Jenya for everyone who worked on this report. Thank you for the question, Stamati. So what we're seeing, I think, with our gender distribution, each time the advisory council met, generally our kind of flow of applications and how gender was distributed went anywhere from 24 to 26%. So, and unintentionally, because all of the selections were merit-based at the end of the day, it seemed that we came in pretty close to what was submitted with how those individuals of females were selected for the program. Also, if you look through our roster of people who didn't apply in each cycle, you'll see much fewer than 10% of our diaspora scholars on our roster are females. So the Greek academic diaspora seems to be primarily male. So that, I think, is showing that, we actually had a pretty strong response from female applicants as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you, Jeremy. And the next question is about whether that new curricula that was developed, whether it was more student-centered than the traditional approaches. Shelby or Jeremy, which one of you would like to answer that one?
I had some, I guess I wondered with this question if maybe I had kind of miscommunicated about the student-centeredness of projects. So, I think, correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but I think the projects themselves, we were not necessarily looking at whether the curricula that had been developed were better than previous projects. That wasn't necessarily the point of reference. What we were looking for was whether the fellowship projects were centering student needs and outcomes, and curricula projects tended to do that more because they incorporated, because they centered around something that specifically was designed for students. The curricula projects, in terms of how they were being improved, how curricula were being developed or updated or improved, really, really varied. Some programs were developing completely new classes or degree programs based on mutual interest of the host and the fellow. A lot of hosts use the GDFP as a way to bring in an expert that they had heard and met and wanted to have support and advice from as they went through this major curricula update that they were already working on. So I may have misunderstood the question, but I just wanted to kind of clarify that we were not judging the quality of the previous curricula. They were good already, but what hosts were really found valuable was the opportunity to have somebody come in person, meet their students, see their facilities, see how their program really worked, and that really allowed for a better just kind of synthesis of ideas and bringing the newest, latest, and greatest and making it fit in the context of the institution.
May I follow up, if that is all right? May I follow up with that question?
Please.
Well, first of all, let me just introduce myself. I'm Stamatis Vokos. I'm a member of the advisory board, and I cannot tell you how emotionally charged this moment is to see all the good work that has happened, and all the good work associated with the AME component as well. So thank you so much for doing such a deep dive into the data. My question had to do with the student-centeredness, in the sense of the work that has been happening in the United States and elsewhere around discipline-based educational research about improving student learning, about improving the student experience, and so I would love to see in future project that aspect to be surfaced a little bit more. And so there are major reform efforts that are happening in the United States, and we want to see those efforts influence, build upon, but also inform back the host institutions as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your excitement about our findings. It's always a pleasure to be evaluating a program as successful as GDFP. Definitely, we will take a look if we have anything on teaching approaches and methodologies. We find that usually it does come through as part of the collaboration on any kind of teaching, mentoring, and so forth. And we'll see if there has been anything in our qualitative data on that, but definitely appreciate the focus on the student-centeredness for sure. Eleni, please.
Yes, hello. I would like to thank Shelby. I'm happy to hear the presentation after having also met with her personally when she was here in Athens back in May. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. For example, will it be evident in the report? I mean, how long after the fellowship had ended when we say that that there is still a legacy in the institution after the fellow has left? How long after the fellow has left? Will it be specified on a case-by-case basis? Because it's very different if it's 1 month after or 1 year after, or I mean, this makes a big difference. And when another question is, when we say 46 new and continued research collaborations, do we mean after the end of the fellowship? And my last question is about funding. That at least 1.7 million euro was fundraised. How can we be certain that this was only because of the fellowship? And I saw also ERC did a fellow and host pair did an ERC. That's really outstanding if it happened. Thank you.
I took my notepad off my desk and now you're gonna have to remind me, Eleni, what you said. But yes, thank you for the questions, because they are good data questions that I do hope we've properly discussed in the report. For the first question was about, remind me, it wasn't the number of, I want to go in order.
It was, will it be specified on a case-by-case basis how long after the fellowship had ended, this, like the data that has been derived? I mean, because it makes a big difference if it's 1 month after the fellowship has ended, or 1 year later, to see about the sustained legacy, let's say.
Absolutely, yes. And so, so the bulk of the data that's new is from a survey of participants from the renewal phase of the program.
Right.
And it only looked at participants who had finished at least 3 months prior. So the range could still be anywhere from a little over a year and a half to 3 months prior. But I hope the sampling data in the report will properly delineate those details.
And what about funding? When you say at least 1.7 million, do you mean, does this regard the full number of 119 fellowships, or just the renewal ones?
So it really, because based on our response rates, it really only represents renewals, and it doesn't fully represent renewals because we did not have 100% response rate.
Yeah, right. I understood it's
yes.
not, it doesn't fully represent,
but it's at the very minimum. Yeah.
And but at the minimum and only regarding renewals, right? The second phase, the second grant. Okay.
Yeah, it's at the very, very least. It's the most possible conservative number. With we have the exact documentation, it's deduplicated. But yeah.
So did a host manage to get an ERC grant after the end of the fellowship?
I can check.
Okay.
I can check whether that was mentioned as an application in process or a grant received.
Okay.
And
but would that be part of the report?
Yeah, I can make sure that that's
okay. And what about the Red Sea Research Conference? Did that conference only take place because of the fellowship? Okay.
It was the primary project of the fellowship.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Shelby.
Wonderful questions. I hope I answered them correctly. Correct me if I was wrong about any of that, Jeremy.
No, that all sounds in line with what we've discussed. Thank you.
And I would maybe add just to the legacy after the fellowship part. So of course, the big element there was the alumni grants. That's where we saw a huge difference, that or rather a huge impact, that when fellows were able to come back to the host institution for an alumni grant, those relationships were just so strong. And one element, one aspect of it that we have been considering and we've heard from fellows is how it would have been useful for them to know at the start that they would be able to come back, because they would have been able to structure their work a little bit differently, knowing that. But overall, I think, can confidently say that the connections and the work together has continued after the fellowship, and definitely for much longer than a month. And that has been quite impressive, and that's the type of sustained impact that we always look for when looking at impact evaluation.
And I did just remember that was for Eleni, your other question about whether the 46 continued anew was solely looking at people's newly developed projects or projects that continued after 3 months post fellowship. So that number specifically is only looking at impact stage partnerships. And again, hopefully there's a lot of different pieces that we tried to take into consideration. But then of course that makes it a little difficult to keep everybody straight on what I'm talking about. I wrote numbers. So that, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. So you mean that even if they had already started, they continued at least 3 months following the end of the formal fellowship, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And then there were also some newly developed projects.
Yeah, well,
Yes,
completely new
right.
as well, including,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question.
Excellent. We have just 4 minutes left, so maybe one more question. Okay, well, I'm glad that we have answered all that we could, and I'll pass it back to Jeremy.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you again, Shelby, for the presentation, and Jenya and Shelby for all of your work, and those other contributors from the REL unit here at IIE. Grateful to have the great questions coming from the Advisory Council and our funding partners at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. Thank you so much, Eleni, for joining us today and representing the foundation, as well as your colleague, Chris, who's on the call. We are very excited to share this report with all of you in this call today, as well as those who couldn't attend. We will also be posting a webinar recording of this on our YouTube channel. One other note that I wanted to bring up is we do continue work with a Hellenic Diaspora Academic Association that was developed as part of the GDFP. This group of individuals is still meeting and coordinating various events. So please do look out on the social media or other mailings for information about our next event, which will be a distinguished lecturer, another distinguished lecturer coming in January or February of 2023. So thank you all for your time, and once again appreciate the contributions of the REL team, the Niarchos Foundation, the Fulbright Foundation, as well as our Advisory Council who guided this program strategically throughout. So everyone have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.